Resistance is God. What do I mean by that? Well, it's a realization I came to recently. And then I just kept thinking about it and meditating on it and reflecting on it. And I was like, oh, okay. Resistance is God. What does that mean, though? I'll start by defining the word resistance. So, resistance, the textbook definition of resistance, the refusal to accept or comply with something or the attempt to prevent something by action or argument. I'll say that one more time. The refusal to accept or comply with something, the attempt to prevent something by action or argument. Resistance is God. So let me now explain what I mean by that. And I'm gonna start by breaking down or telling you guys a story of one of the times I felt absolutely the strongest resistance, some of the strongest resistance that I've ever felt. And this was back, I don't even remember what year this was, but this was definitely back when I was in college. Had to be like 2017, 2018, maybe earlier, who knows. But either way, I'm a musician, right? Classically trained musician. I was in music school at this time. So I'm a classically trained musician, but I've always been more into learning like jazz theory and improvisation because I'm not just a classical musician. I also create my own music. I produce and I write songs and all of that. And like the classical theory, the classical tonality was just never it was never my jam when it came up to my original sound. So I knew that in order to break through to this new level of musicianship that I knew I needed to start going to jam sessions. And I knew I needed to start, putting myself in situations where I could improvise more and could practice improvising more. So back in college, I went to a jam session with one of my close homies at the time, who was also a guitar player. And we went to this jam session, and I was so excited because this was my first time going to practice improvisation or improvising. And when I got there, that's when the resistance kicked in. This is when the resistance kicked in. I got there, my homie who I came with, like I said, he's a guitar player. So it was basically like at a bar, almost like a cigar lounge kind of thing, but it was like people were smoking cigarettes, people were smoking cigars. It was a bar, it was a very hyper stimulated environment. And then there was a band, and the band was, they had their own stage and whatnot. So it was kind of like a place where you kick back, drink, smoke, listen to live music. And so there's a drummer, there's a keyboard player, there's a bass player, and there's a guitar player. And so there was like mainly people who come to jam sessions, a lot of times they're guitar players or they're, sometimes vocalists. But this time around, there was just so many guitar players. The keyboard player was staying on there, bass player was staying on so there's just guitar players, right? A lot of guitar players waiting to play. Every guitar player who went up there was shredding, like it was crazy. It was almost like so if you don't know what a jam session is, it's basically when musicians get together and they create music improvisation. There's no sheet music, there's no plan. Somebody just starts to groove, whether the drummer starts playing something or the keyboard starts playing a chord progression, and everybody just jumps in and does something to create a track out of nowhere. And so but they did like how it was working, how everybody's synergy on the stage was working was the guitar player was like had a spotlight shining on them. Like it was like every guitar player who went up there, it was almost like they were expected to solo because, you know, a lot of times electric guitar, like you're gonna solo, right? And they're playing some of the craziest solos. Like, I mean, these guys have been doing this for a minute. And here I am at my first ever jam session, like pretty much classical musician, classical guitarist. And I'm like, yo, I know I brought my guitar and I have my guitar on my back, but there's no flipping way I'm getting on that stage. Like, this is what I'm thinking the entire time. Maybe like after the first guy went, I was like, okay, wow, that was crazy. I don't know what I'm gonna do about that. Then the next guy came on, and it was just like everybody was just so good. All the guitarists were just so good. And I was like, there's no way I can get on stage. Like, I'm completely outclassed here. I'm gonna get laughed at. It was my first jam session ever. Resistance was at an all-time high. And then my homie Landon goes up. The guy who I came with, who is also a guitar player. And he goes up there and he goes insane. I mean, he stays up there for like probably like 3 songs. And he goes insane, like to the point where like this whole experience, like for me as like a first time, like going to a jam session for the first time, I was like almost in tears, like how amazing how much beautiful music is made and just never recorded, right? So my homie goes up there, he kills it, he plays like 3 songs in a row, and he goes crazy every single one. And then after he's done, he starts gesturing for me to come on stage. And like, I was just like, nah, man, I'm not getting on stage. By that point, I had already decided. It's like, it's not even that there wasn't even any resistance anymore. It was like, I had already decided that I'm not getting on stage. There was no battle. I was not battling with myself. I already knew that I wasn't getting on stage. But everybody needs a homie like Landon, everyone, because he didn't take no for an answer. He was just like, nah, man, come on. He knew that this was going to be my first jam session because I told him about it. He's like, come on, man, like, come on. Like, I'm like, no, I'm not getting on stage. When I tell you we went back and forth for like a good minute, I can't even tell you how long it was, but I probably said no like 5 to 10 times. And this man just wouldn't. I'm expecting him to give up and be like, all right, whatever, after like the 3rd or 4th no. But he just kept saying no back. Like he kept saying like, nah, you have to get on stage. Like, come on, it's your turn, blah, blah. And then I was just like, damn. That's when I started. That's when I realized, like, damn, I'm actually about to get on stage after all of that. What? Like, he really is not gonna leave me alone. And so I got on stage. And the amount of nerves that I had, like I said, this is the time where I experienced the most resistance I have ever experienced in my life. And as much as I can remember, I'm sure there's been other times too, but like this is one specifically that's like in the forefront of my brain. Like, I had already decided that I wasn't going to get on stage, but I ended up on stage somehow. Landon helped me beat the resistance, right? I get on stage, I play. Long story short, I was shit. I was horrible. I was really bad. Honestly, I was up there for 2 songs. The first song I was up there, I'm like kind of like fiddling around on my guitar. And I'm so nervous, I can't even hear anything. I'm like, I can hear the band, but I can't even hear myself. And I'm like, yo, I hope I don't sound bad, because I can't even hear myself, because I don't know. I didn't know. I thought like there was like something going on with the mix. Like I just couldn't hear my guitar coming out. And then after the song ended, I realized that I hadn't even turned my guitar up. That's how nervous I was. That's how scared I was. I hadn't even turned my guitar up and I was playing it, and I thought it was like I didn't know why I couldn't hear myself. And I went a whole song like messing with my guitar and shit wasn't even on. Man, that was crazy. But then when I realized that, I had enough courage to turn my guitar up. And that, I'm not gonna say it was a mistake, because it wasn't, but after I turned my guitar up, that's when everybody could really hear how bad I was. And the thing is, the reason why the resistance was so high to do this is because I had been playing guitar for a good minute. So I was a decent guitar player. I could play really hard songs that probably a lot of those players up there who were improvising couldn't play. Like, my technique, crazy. Like, the songs that I knew, crazy. But improvising in a jam session environment, so it's like when you're actually decent at something or good at something, and then you have to do that same thing, but you have to do it in such an obscure way, such a different way than you're used to, I feel like that's when resistance is the highest. But moving on, long story short, I get up there, I play like crap. The keyboardist is making faces because I'm out of key. And then I get off stage. But I noticed something towards the end of the song. Towards the end of this, I was playing like crap, but towards the end of the song, like, I was like, oh, okay, I found something. Like, I found a little pocket. I found a little something that works. You know, it wasn't like great. I wasn't like soloing or anything, but the keyboardist wasn't making faces. You know what I'm saying? Like, the progress was like, oh, I saw a little bit of progress, and I was only up there for a couple minutes. But overall, my performance was still shit. And so I got off stage, and I was just thinking about it, and I was just like, wow, like, that was nerve-wracking. And long story short, as bad and embarrassing as it was to play one song where my guitar wasn't even on, and another song where my guitar was on, but it was trash, I still got back on that same day, that same night, actually. So I was really proud of myself, because the thing is, getting on first, it showed me that even though it was kind of embarrassing or whatever, it was almost like, oh, that's all it was. It was just a little bit of embarrassment, and I didn't really care afterwards. It was like, okay, let's try to do it again. And the second time I went up there, you know, again, I wasn't like amazing or like soloing or anything, but I found my spot in the band. I found my spot in the band, and I brought my piece to what everybody else was doing, and I actually created good sounds, nice sounds. You know, I wasn't improvising and doing all this stuff, but I successfully fit inside that jam session, and that was only my second time getting on stage. Why am I telling you this story? Notice what happened when I went against the resistance, when I actually did the thing that was on the other side of resistance. The level of growth was insane. The level of growth was crazy. Like I said, I felt it from song to song, and that's why I was able to get back on stage. Even though my first time on stage was embarrassing, I felt something clicked, even though it might have not sounded like it. Right? What would have happened if I didn't get on stage? If I didn't get on stage, I probably would have continued my routine of going home, practicing more classical pieces, practicing more music theory, and still be stuck in that loop of thinking that's gonna take me to the level of musicianship that I wanted to go to, even though it's obvious that it wouldn't. The reason why I say resistance is God is because when we feel that deep resistance, like that I was talking about earlier, it's not telling what we're hearing, what we're feeling is not, don't do that thing. Or rather, it is what we're hearing, but we're listening to the wrong voice. The resistance itself is God's voice. The feeling of allowing ourselves to not take action when we feel resistance, that is, or rather, let me explain it this way. Resistance is basically our current self making excuses and being afraid of who we want to be, of who we want to become, who we're completely capable of becoming. I'm going to go back to the textbook definition of resistance. The refusal to accept or comply with something. So that is our current self refusing to accept or comply with God, with our higher self, with who we want to be. The second definition was the attempt to prevent something by action or argument. The attempt to prevent growth. So what we're preventing, what we're attempting to prevent by listening to resistance is we're literally trying to prevent our own growth by action or argument. My argument during this jam session was, I'm about to embarrass myself. I'm nowhere near on the level of these other guitarists. I was literally attempting to prevent my own growth. So again, why do I say resistance is God? It's because when you become conscious of this, that's when shit gets interesting. When you get conscious of this, you become so powerful, because when you feel resistance, you know that that's a sign to run towards the resistance, to do exactly what you're afraid of, to get on stage, to pursue, to do that thing that feels so hard to do. Because it only feels hard to do because you're not doing it. It's the only reason. Being on stage wasn't that hard. Being on stage wasn't that hard. But getting on stage was, it was insane. So, for the conscious person, resistance is a tool. Resistance is the way. It's a map. It's a map that leads you exactly to who you want to be, where you want to be. So essentially, when you're afraid, when you feel that deep fear, that deep resistance to do that thing that you know you want to do, run towards it. That's where you're supposed to go. That's a sign. It's a trigger. It's God telling you that this is where you need to go. And it's a combination of God telling you where you need to go and your current lower self arguing against it. So don't even listen to the argument. Don't even think too hard about it. If the resistance is there, run towards it. Resistance is an advantage, because when you feel resistance, there's no question. It's an identifier. It's a green light, even though it feels like a stoplight. It's actually a green light. What happens when we reject resistance? Like I said, if I would have not gotten on stage, it ran out the jam session when Landon was forcing me to get on stage, I would have prevented my own self from growth. When we reject resistance, when we allow the resistance to keep us not acting on the thing that we're afraid of, the voice of God gets quieter, aka the resistance. It gets less less intense, because the thing that we don't want it as bad anymore. The more we don't go for the thing, we start wanting it less and less, or rather we start believing that we don't want it as much. This is how dreams die. This is how goals die. Because when people feel this resistance, they comply with it. They don't see it as the way to go. They see it as the way to not go. And then it gets easier and easier to keep not going there. What's the opposite of resistance? Comfort. Comfort, if resistance is God, comfort is the devil. Because comfort is what's going to keep us right where we want to be. And we wouldn't feel resistance if we were happy where we wanted to be. Think about that. We wouldn't feel resistance if we were happy where we wanted to be. There would be no back and forth battle between, I want to do this thing, but I don't want to do it, or I'm not ready, or I'm not this, or I'm not that. If we were comfortable, we wouldn't even feel that to begin with. So run towards resistance. Use resistance to your advantage. Ever since I've adopted this mindset, my life has significantly improved. Mental health has significantly improved. Tangible life, physical life has significantly improved. Resistance is the way. The obstacle is the way. There's a book that's called that I've never read, but if I had to guess, it has something to do with that. Resistance is God.